everyone. Good evening. I want to make sure you all, oh yes, you can hear me now. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming to the Jacalyn and William P. Egan Lecture this evening. For all those that you are joining us here in person, we're very happy to see you. For those that are on Zoom, I'm waving to you on camera. Thank you for joining us from wherever you're located. It's my honor as the Director of Museum Affairs and Chief Curator to oversee the Fellows Program. I get to work with incredibly talented people, two of whom you'll be hearing from this evening, and also two of whom spoke last week at the Jacalyn Lectures, Mary Kate and Catherine. The Preservation Society of Newport County's Fellows Program provides really an exceptional experience for young scholars in the fields of decorative arts history, material culture history, art history, architectural history, and social history to work on projects that are relevant to their specialties, while also providing an environment for professional development. The fellows live in a restored carriage house that's located at the Elms, which is designed by famed architect Horace Trumbauer, and they get to spend 11 months with us researching and producing content that serves our mission. So they really are integral to who we are as a research institution. This evening we'll be hearing from Sébastien Dutton and Fran Mann, who will present on their respective projects, which you'll note are very different in design and focus. However, they each contribute significantly to our institution's goals of educating the public, not just about the sites that are part of our collections, but about the people who designed, built, lived, worked, and made these houses what they are, and also the community that they reside in. Fran and Sebastian's work will demonstrate the breadth of scope we are taking to ensure we focus on both the small and big picture when it comes to the Gilded Age in Newport and America. So I'm so pleased to have had the opportunity to work with both of you. We wish Sebastian the best of luck with his future endeavors as his fellowship is coming to an end this month. And we're excited to welcome Fran as a continuing member of the new Fellows class for 2021 and 2022. For those of you who are with us this evening in person, we will be doing questions and answers following both presentations. Sebastian will be presenting first, and then Fran will be presenting. So if you could just hold your questions till the end, that will be great, and I'll facilitate that Q&A. For those of you who are joining us from home via Zoom, unfortunately, we're not able to take questions online. Technology is not as easy as it sounds. But if you do have questions we don't get to tonight, please do get in touch with the Preservation Society. So on to our speakers. First, we'll hear from Sebastian, who has been a Preservation Society Fellow since 2019 and earned his bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies from Oklahoma Baptist University. His studies focused on business administration and the French language. In May of 2019, he received his Master of Arts in Historic Preservation from Boston Architectural College, where he focused on Gilded Age America. He has interned with the Curator of Collections at Shelburne Farms, another Vanderbilt property, and has received 3 consecutive scholarships to attend the Newport Symposium. He has spoken at the Decorative Arts Trust Emerging Scholars Colloquium in 2020 and 2021, the Preservation Society's Spring Lecture Series in 2020, and most recently the 35th Rhode Island Historic Preservation Conference. Sebastian has worked on digitally mapping the interiors of the Preservation Society's historic properties and researching the 3rd floor of the breakers. And I think also, if many of you have enjoyed our virtual tours, we owe those tours to Sebastian. He gets to take full credit for them. So thank you, Sebastian. And following Sebastian will be Fran. And with that, I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm both excited and a little sad to be standing here today. Excited to be able to present my findings from the last 2 years, and sad because my time here in Newport is coming to an end for now. So I've loved living in the city and being with the Preservation Society, despite being here during some of the most challenging times faced by both. I'd like to thank Trudy Cox, who's been so supportive of my work and research over the last 2 years. Thank you to Jacalyn and William P. Egan for their support of the fellowship program. Leslie Jones, whose help and guidance along the way has been instrumental in my success. Thank you to my 3 co-fellows, 2 of them who are here tonight, for being sounding boards for my many thoughts and ideas. Thanks to Moira Gallagher at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Richard Guy Wilson, John Laboutelier, and the family members who've participated in the Oral History Project. Thank you. And the entire staff of the Preservation Society, who've all been so helpful and accommodating as I've crawled through every home from basement to attic. Thank you to my lovely family and friends for their support and making me believe that what I think is interesting actually is. And lastly, thank you to the Vanderbilt family descendants, but especially Gladys and Paul Zipari, for their obvious love and devotion as caretakers of the 3rd floor space, as without that care, everything you're going to be seeing today most certainly would have ended up quite differently. I feel like I'm giving an Emmys acceptance speech, and time is running out, so I'm going to thank everyone else who I have forgotten. Thank you. You're all appreciated. So, as the title suggests, I'll be discussing the 3rd floor of the Breakers and the things discovered within. For those of you who watched my lecture over the 3rd floor last August, I'll be building upon the information presented then, so it shan't feel too repetitive. But before getting to the 3rd floor, I'm going to briefly discuss the ongoing digitization of our houses and how it's evolved and been used by people both in the Preservation Society and out. With the shutdown in spring of 2020 of all of our houses, I was presented the opportunity to enter them without guests and begin creating virtual tours. And over the last 1.5 years, I've been able to scan and create tours of the last 3 exhibitions at Rosecliff, as well as almost all of our houses, most of which are available to view on the Newport Mansion's website, along with virtual tours of off-tour areas to be used internally. In the coming week, the most ambitious virtual tour yet, The Breakers, should be available to view on our website, and by the end of the month, Brayton House at Green Animals will also be available, completing the virtual collection. Since the start of that project, the tours have been viewed over 200,000 times and have more than 905,000 impressions, which is when a page is visited where one of the virtual tours is embedded. A number of the tours have had information inserted to provide visitors the ability to interact with the spaces in a way that's different than our in-person tours and to learn more about the furniture, paintings, and objects within. Additionally, the virtual tours remain the only way to, quote, visit a number of our houses that have yet to reopen to the public, and access is provided free of charge for all of them. I'd like to really stress the importance of this accessibility aspect of these virtual tours. We have visitors from around the world who come to Newport to visit the houses, but even in non-COVID times, there are many who are unable to do that. And these tours open up and provide access to that information, architecture, and history to anybody with internet access. And this is not at the expense of losing in-person visitors either, as feedback has shown that the virtual tours complement the in-person experience and vice versa. Internally, the tours have been used by numerous departments to help with setting the houses back up after objects have been moved for cleaning, photography, condition reports, and inventories, among other things. And overall, they've proven to be a useful tool for people in and out of the organization, and there remains further opportunities in the future for additional uses. These tours have also received press coverage both locally and nationally over the last 1.5 years, appearing in everything from the New York Times to the San Diego Union Tribune. And to learn more about the creation of the tours, my lecture, Let's Get Digital, from last year is available to view on the Newport Mansion's YouTube page. And to view the tours yourself, you can visit our website at newportmansions.org. So now I'm going to move on to the 3rd floor of the Breakers, the main topic of my lecture and what y'all signed up to actually hear about. And as I do anytime I'm discussing the Breakers and the 3rd floor, for those who are unfamiliar, I'm going to start out with a context of the space, including what the Breakers is and why the 3rd floor in particular is important. The Breakers was commissioned by Alice Gwynn Vanderbilt and Cornelius Vanderbilt II after the first Breakers burnt to the ground over Thanksgiving 1892. They hired architect Richard Morse Hunt to design the second Breakers, and Hunt had already designed a number of Vanderbilt family homes prior to this commission, including Willie K. and Alva's Marble House, also located here in Newport, and their Petite Chateau on 5th Avenue in New York City, along with George Vanderbilt's house, Biltmore, in Asheville, North Carolina. The Breakers, measuring over 100,000 square feet, was constructed in just 2 years, from 1893 to 1895, a brilliant achievement in engineering and planning. Interior design was split between two firms, with Alarde Fee decorating the lavish public spaces of the first floor and Ogden Codman Jr. designing the family spaces of the second and third. The story of the third floor and why we're discussing it in particular is a unique one. The breakers opened to the public in 1948 thanks to a lease agreement with the Preservation Society and the Vanderbilt family, and the Preservation Society purchased the breakers from descendants in 1972. When the house opened for tours in 1948, beginning with the first floor and soon after adding the second, the third floor became a family apartment that was used by Vanderbilt family descendants over the next 60 years until 2018. On the left is a heavily redacted Vanderbilt family tree to show the line of passage and usage for the house, and more specifically, the third floor apartment. This will also help you to better follow the names mentioned in the slides to come. So starting at the top, we have Cornelius II and Alice Gwynn, who built the breakers. Moving down to their children, and in the center is Countess Gladys Sacchini. She's actually the youngest. She's in the center just looks nicer. Going down from there, it goes to Countess Sylvia Zipari, known as Civi, and from there to Gladys and Paul, her children, and the last descendants who are staying on the third floor. So it's important to understand and know this line of succession because they are the ones who loved and cared for the third floor over the 60-year period after the house opened to the public, and the care, devotion, and preservation work under their watch has left us today with an incredible space that is largely intact and original to its 1895 completion, a true time capsule. Now, during my lecture last August, I gave a virtual walkthrough of the space, room by room, and I won't be repeating that same tour today, but I am going to take us through to put it in context with the rest of the house, as the space is currently not open or accessible to the public. So on the right side of the screen is the floor plan of the third floor. What you see here, so this section that the cursor is going around, is directly above the Great Hall. So if you are in the house, when you first enter the Great Hall, that is directly above that. There is a patio in this space here that is above the second floor loggia, and the third floor was originally designed as the boys' floor. So the three surviving sons' bedrooms would have been up on this floor when the house opened. So I'm going to open the virtual tour. I'm going to do a very quick walkthrough. It's a big space, and I could easily spend the entire lecture just taking us through this. So what you see here is the main hallway. So whenever the family came up to the space, they would enter through the elevator here from the basement. Going down the hall is the servant space. The main kitchen that the family used is located just around the corner in the servant spaces there. And then moving through here, we have a small galley kitchen that is part of a repurposed bathroom. So on the other side of this doorway here is actually the walled-off toilet and bathtub of the original bathroom. Moving through the hall, we're going into room number 18 of the floor plan. So it was originally a bedroom. The family used it as a dining room. So the furniture you see in there, the patio furniture, was originally on the lower loggia, but moved up there and used as dining room furniture. Moving on through to bedroom 17 in the floor plan. I'm just going to walk through and show them. I won't discuss each space. This bathroom is very similar to the bathroom on the floor below, with the toilet and the sink in separate little closets on either side of bathtub and an alcove. We're now in bedroom number 16. I'll discuss this bedroom in particular in much more detail later on in the presentation. Each of the bedrooms is connected by a bathroom/dressing room, which you can see here. Moving into bedroom number 16. Through to another small dressing room and closet only, and from there we go into bedroom 15. Two beds in this bedroom. The bed you see on the right was originally in the dining room, number 18, so that bed originally belonged to that room. space I'll discuss later in the tour. On the other side of this door is the upper patio. And come through here, and there are 3 bedrooms on an upper landing here that are very distinct and different than the lower bedrooms. They're all connected to one another, with the only bathroom for the 3 located downstairs, down this little set of stairs through this hallway. So again, that's just a very, very quick overview of the space, probably whiplash from spinning around. But you can go to the YouTube page for Newport Mansions and get a full tour where I walk through every single room, discussing objects in all of them. So design-wise, there was one man who left an indelible mark on the 3rd floor and whose hand was apparent in almost all aspects, even more so than architect Richard Morris Hunt. And that man was Ogden Codman Jr. But who was he, and why does he matter? Ogden Codman Jr. was born in Boston in 1863 into a family that had for generations been an important part of the Boston scene. After the Great Fire in Boston in 1872, the family lost a large portion of their fortune, which had been invested in real estate, and they exiled themselves to France until 1884, an experience that made a strong impression on young Ogden. Upon his return to Boston, Codman enrolled as a student of architecture at what is now MIT, although he left after only a year. He subsequently learned a lot about architecture and interior design from relatives who worked in those fields, and they served as mentors and guides for him. He bounced around various firms in the years after his return from France, including a stint of time at A.H. Davenport, a Boston-based furniture manufacturer that created furniture found in many important homes during the latter part of the 19th and 20th century. This connection with Codman is found in the use of Davenport for the suites of furnishings found on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the Breakers. Thanks to Codman's social connections, he spent a lot of time with influential society people and began making summer visits to Newport, which is where he met Edith Wharton, seen in the picture on the right, and who became one of his earliest clients in 1891. Both bonded over the, quote, dullness of most Newport society, their appreciation of European art and culture, and their belief that, quote, interior decoration should be simple and architectural. In 1897, they published The Decoration of Houses together, where they laid out their beliefs and rules for interior, decor, and design. It was published 2 years after Codman finished The Breakers, and many of the concepts and ideas discussed in the book were honed and perfected during the commission. The Decoration of Houses was also Edith's first published book, and she later went on to publish such well-known novels as Age of Innocence, The House of Mirth, and Ethan Frome, and her books were often a social commentary on the upper-class society of the Gilded Age. After Codman finished The Breakers, his career gained traction, and he was given his first commission for a full house design in 1897. Codman designed and altered many houses and interiors over the next 20 years, including Berkeley Villa, seen in the top right corner, which is located in and still standing here in Newport, just down Bellevue Avenue from where we are currently. He also worked with the Wetmores, designing the Green Salon at Chateau-sur-Mer, a Preservation Society property that has just reopened for tours, which is seen in the lower right corner. He closed his office in 1920 after World War I ended, unhappy and feeling out of touch with the many societal changes it brought about. Aside from a brief trip back to the US in 1928, Codman spent the remainder of his life in France, dying there in 1951 at age 89. From initial drawings of the space to completed design, Codman played an instrumental role in the look, feel, and layout of the 3rd floor. Thanks to Codman's donations of his life's work to various institutions, including elevation drawings at Columbia University, watercolors at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and letters and furniture drawings done with A.H. Davenport at Historic New England, I was able to piece together and trace his process for designing the 3rd floor space. As I mentioned earlier, The Breakers was Codman's first large commission, and it remains today one of the most original surviving Codman designs, even in comparison to the 2nd floor of The Breakers, which was also one of his designs. His excitement over the commission is apparent in a series of letters to his mother sent between 1893 and 1894. December of 1893, he writes, "Mother, who do you suppose I have for a client? Teddy Wharton told me today that Mr. Cornelius Vanderbilt wants to see me at his office tomorrow to talk about doing his Newport house. He talked about his house and he wants me to do a part. The nicest and richest of them all. I can hardly believe it's true. I'm going to thank Mr. Wharton who brought this about." The following August, 1894, he again writes his mother, "The house is immense, and I am proud to be doing it. No one could be nicer or kinder than he. He took me everywhere over the house and stable and seems to rely on me a good deal. He was pleased because I saw a way of arranging a door he wanted between the dining and billiard rooms so that it would be handsome instead of hideous." A week later, he wrote his mother again, "Mother, Mrs. Vanderbilt is evidently rather shy, but I hope she will like me too, as it is much easier to get on if they like me. Mr. Vanderbilt drove me to my office today. It was much the same as driving with the Prince of Wales or a very good duke." So I've selected bedroom number 16, originally labeled bedroom number 11, on the third floor to illustrate the design process from elevation drawing to watercolor to as-built. The room I've chosen has the largest collection of elevation drawings and watercolors of any of the third floor rooms, along with furniture drawings from A.H. Davenport. In the elevation drawing, we can see the design of the room taking place, with doors, moldings, mantels, paneling, fixture mounts, and mirrors indicated, along with most dimensions. The wall coverings are charmingly labeled "stuff," a label Codman used on many of his elevation drawings. Moving on to the watercolor, his design and vision for the space can now be seen in full color, including furniture renderings, marble and wood finishes, wall sconces, and artwork. The walls previously labeled "stuff" are now a blue fabric with an ornate border along the ceiling. Codman often included furniture in his watercolors on either side of the fireplace when present, even when as built, those spaces often had jib doors or were next to an entryway. Looking at the space as it appears today, you can see that it was not only built almost exactly as originally designed, but that it remains so today, down to the linen wall coverings, which have since faded to brown. And again, this is a testament to not only the authenticity of the space, but the preservation philosophy taken by the Vanderbilt family members, which honored the original materials, only replacing them when absolutely functionally necessary. Here we can see that the furniture pieces in the watercolor were also built as designed, and they are still found on the third floor, although the desk has since been moved to another room. Also note that the fireplace as built features the same marble coloring, carvings, and ormolu mounts as the watercolor drawing and elevation drawing. And while the wall covering has faded to brown, in the linen closet there was a bolster pillow with a hang tag marked number 16, showing the original unfaded blue color, which you can see in the image of inset into the elevation drawing in top center. Elsewhere in the room, there's a bed made of French walnut by A.H. Davenport, with the design faithfully recreated from the drawing. It's assumed that Codman worked directly with Davenport on the furniture design for the commission, but due to ongoing institutional closures, I've still yet to be able to read through the letters and documents that could confirm this assumption. One thing to note is that the drawings for this bed indicate chamber number 9, and the room it's now located in was originally chamber number 11. A number of the pieces throughout the third floor, while original to the space, have been shuffled from one room to another. Next to the fireplace in the bedroom, there's a chair of cherry with a cane seat and back, and comparing with the original drawings by Davenport, we can see that the chair was built nearly exactly as drawn, with the main differences being that the caning on the side and back continued to the seat, and a small piece of padding and fabric was added to the armrest. And dressing room number 7, which is the bathroom between bedroom 14 and the living room, is another example of a room where not only was the finished space and furnishings very similar to the watercolor, but they remain so today in exactly the same spot. The only notable changes between the two are the gaslight fixtures found on either side of the mirror, and the removal of keyholes and change of hardware material used on the dresser between the watercolor drawings and as-built. As you've seen from this small selection of watercolors and drawings, the Breakers' third floor apartment is an exceptional example of early Ogden Codman work that maintains a high degree of originality. Despite the information that I was able to uncover, more remains known but inaccessible for research a year and a half after the start of the pandemic, including additional letters, elevation drawings, and furniture drawings, all of which are located at institutions that have still yet to fully reopen. Beyond research on Ogden Codman's role in the design of the third floor, additional details have been unveiled thanks to oral histories done in conjunction with John LeBoutillier and surviving family members who visited and or spent significant time in the space over the last 75 years. It's important to remember that not only is this an architecturally important space, but it was also a home that was lived in, used, and shared with family and friends. Life happened and was lived here for 123 years. Thanks to the Oral History Project, we're able to better fill out that social history of the third floor and fill in the blanks or amend a number of the details I discussed during last year's presentation. In the following slides, I'm going to share with you some of the stories and details that both bring the space to life and remind us that this is a 19th century space that was used well into the 21st century with few material changes. If you start to look more closely at things while on the third floor, you'll begin to notice the labels that are found everywhere. Pulling open a drawer, you may find them on the top edge. Opening a cabinet, they may be on the shelves. Go into one of the closets and you'll find them on the drawers, indicating that the contents are brocades and fancy dress, or maybe two heavy blue bedspreads for rooms number 15 and 16. In the bathroom, you'll find instructions for how to operate the toilet, still connected to the plumbing system originally installed back in the 19th century. Many of these notes and labels were originally written by Countess Anthony Zipari, known as Civvy, granddaughter of Alice and Cornelius, in her, quote, unmistakable, large, clear handwriting. According to oral history, quote, Civvy was the one in charge of what went on the third floor and who made sure it was kept clean and that things were in their place. Other notes and labels were reminders of the generations of staff and family who spent time there, whether tutoring the children in Hungarian or serving as personal secretaries. Remaining today, they serve as pieces of the puzzle telling the story of the third floor and bring a human level to the grand space. Many have asked and wondered what it was like staying as a guest on the third floor, and those who visited and stayed there often had specific rooms where they would usually stay. When going up to the third floor during the summer now, it can be a bit warm and stuffy as it's not connected to the geothermal system of the lower floors. But during the family's occupation of it, Gladys Thomas recalled, quote, you shouldn't worry about the lack of air conditioning. That whole place was naturally air conditioned by sea breezes day and night. A recurring theme was the respect for the space shown by all who visited. They knew they were in some place special and treated it accordingly. It was remembered as, quote, one of the wonderful things about Gladys and Paul after Aunt Civvy's death in February 1998 is that they welcomed family to the third floor. During my virtual tour last year, in the living room I included an image of a scrap of fabric that I believe to have been a remnant of the original wall covering. In the years since, I've learned that not only was that not the case, but I discovered the story behind the wall covering replacement. Excluding two bedrooms that had their wall coverings replaced with glazed cotton chintz in the early 20th century, all of the other wall coverings found on the third floor are original, save for the living room. So why was this replaced? And what is the story behind it? The reason behind the replacement, according to family members, was bats. So bats came in from behind the old original fabric on the walls, and there would be a time, quote, there would be many a time bats be flying down the hallway. So this left the wall covering falling apart and hanging in shreds. And Gladys and Paul Zipari worked with someone very familiar with Ogden Codman's work to select fabric replacement that, while not identical, gave a similar effect. The family kept a panel of the original fabric, which remains in their possession, but you can see in the Ogden Codman watercolor an idea of what the original would have looked like, along with the replacement on the left. In the original elevation drawings, the living room was labeled as a bedroom, but at some point between the drawings and completion, it did become a living room. Also, according to family, under a board opposite the fireplace center panel, a scribbled notation was found about it being a bedroom. It's still unknown if it was ever used as a bedroom, but the lack of a bedroom suite like those found in the other rooms suggest it wasn't. This space was often used and remembered fondly by family members, being called, quote, a wonderful space because it had all of those windows and there were books in the bookcases. It was full of all kinds of wonderful pillows and upholstery fabrics, making it very inviting and warm. The table in the center of the room, different from the one found there now, had all of Gladys Secheni's photo albums covered in red Moroccan gilt-stamped leather with sepia-toned photographs, one per page set in fixed, hard, gilded cardboard, mostly unlabeled. There are two kitchens on the third floor, which I briefly showed in the virtual tour. A small galley kitchen that is in a repurposed bathroom within the apartment, and a second larger kitchen in the servant space outside the doors of the family apartment. Originally, I'd believed that the small kitchen was installed in 1948 when the breakers opened to the public, but have since learned that it wasn't the case. According to Gladys Thomas, nobody was living in the house in 48, and the first year the family actually used the space was 1953, which is when that kitchen was installed. Once Civvy started going every summer, the bigger kitchen was put in the mid to late 1950s. Like the kitchens in many of our own homes, the kitchen is recalled as, quote, as kind of the heart of the third floor. Lynn Roberts remembers that Gladys was a wonderful hostess and always had things for breakfast. We often discuss these houses as vaunted spaces, relics from a time long past, and with people who lived lives that were wildly dissimilar to our own. And while in many regards this is true, the stories told of the third floor are that of a family home, just like any of our own. For example, in bedroom number 16, the design of which I discussed earlier, the memories and stories of the space that are recalled are not of its size or grandeur, but rather that it was a room with a TV, specifically one with direct TV, which is remembered as being difficult to make work. The rug that you see in the images is rolled up, and the room is one that guests often stayed in when they visited. While the TV is no longer there, everything is pretty much as it was, albeit originally with lamps on the small tables on either side of the bed and blue chairs around the TV, which is located on the other side of the armoire. With many of the family's personal belongings now removed, we look at the space and see a lot of large, open halls, bare floors, and blank walls. When the Saparis were here, however, the space had a warm, comfortable ambiance. The hall you see here had red carpet that is remembered because, quote, you could walk quietly and not be heard. Across from the elevator was an ebonized table where the guest book was kept. It was also the communication center where Gladys and Paul left notes saying where they were, and there was a bowl of candy along with books, magazines, Newport This Week, and various car keys. The hall was filled with furniture, and at the far end, there were huge oak-framed maps of Staten Island where the Vanderbilt family had lived and where the family mausoleum and cemetery are found today, as well as one of George B. Post's drawings of the New York house on Fifth Avenue. The landing, which is the top right corner, had pieces of gilded upholstered armchairs around the corners and edges of the balustrade, and these pieces were from grand parlor furniture sets, not from the Breakers, but rather the New York house. This landing was often used when hosting dinner parties, sometimes with as many as 34 guests, which were fondly remembered by all. For all the emphasis I've put on the third floor being a family space like one of yours or mine, it was still, of course, a family space for the Vanderbilt family, which means their guests were sometimes a little bit different than the ones that you may find visiting your own home. For instance, in 1988, Princess Margaret visited the third floor while she was in Newport, where she attended the Breakers Ball and was given a crystal pineapple. In the photo on the left, you can see her with Countess Zipari, Civi, and John G. Winslow, for whom next week's lecture is named. With the space now sitting vacant and unused, the big question is, what does the future hold for the third floor apartment? There are many paths to choose from and many decisions to be made, each with their own challenges. As you've learned, the space is nearly wholly intact, an original Ogden Codman design, which presents the opportunity for a specialty tour focused on his work, a tour style not found in any of our other houses. It's also unique in that it was a 19th century space being used essentially unaltered well into the 21st. Its history spans over 120 years, and the majority of its stories take place after 1948, making its story distinct from, but also a continuation of the one told on the floors below in the house, which doesn't really extend much beyond 1948. It's closest to the Preservation Society's property, Chepstow, in that it was used in more modern times, although unlike Chepstow, the many modern artifacts and pieces have since been removed. In preservation, and specifically historic house museums, the tendency is to restore, replace, and refinish all surfaces, bringing them back to how they looked when they were new. But the story of the third floor family apartment didn't really begin when the house was new. It was nearly 60 years after the house opened in 1895, before it was used regularly. The choices made by the family in regard to preservation philosophy were deliberate and were focused on keeping the space as it always was, with all of its patina. So when you think about your own house, or maybe your parents' house, for instance, how many still have the original wall coverings, furniture, or layouts after 5 years, or 10, or 20? When the family left, it was 126 years after the Breakers had originally opened, and had survived from the end of the 19th, throughout the 20th, and into the 21st century in a form that would still be instantly recognizable were Cornelius and Alice to return today. The floors below were able to show the glamour of the privileged few who enjoyed the vast wealth accumulated during the Gilded Age, restored and dazzling for all who visit to see. And the third floor is dazzling in its own right and shows lives well lived and holds many stories yet untold. The future of this space has many possibilities, and choosing an option that honors and respects its past is not a task that will be taken lightly. While I'll no longer be a research fellow with the Preservation Society, I will be continuing my research on the space as more repositories open up and I'm able to view the archival materials I've previously located. I'm ending today with Gloria Vanderbilt, the daughter of Reginald Vanderbilt, one of Cornelius and Alice's sons, whose bedroom was found on the 3rd floor. Her words are applicable to not only what I've discussed today, but what you're about to hear from my co-fellow, Fran.
The past isn't over. It's not even past. And I absolutely think it's true.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Our next speaker is Fran, who will be speaking on a forthcoming offering the Preservation Society is building thanks to his work. He has spent the past year assessing the roles of archives, both traditional and digital, bringing insight to how we as a culture can correct the siloed and prejudiced approach to collecting and sharing information, which he'll expand upon further. Fran graduated from the University of York in 2020 with a Master of Arts in Historical Archaeology. His dissertation, The City of Time, Archival and Artfactual Explorations of the Colonial Past, argued for a more nuanced understanding of cities, viewing urban environments as both living archives and artifacts. He has experience in historic preservation, archaeology, and archival work, along with 2 Bachelor of Art degrees from the University of Delaware in anthropology and art history. Welcome, Fran.
Sorry. Thank you, Leslie. To begin, I have a few thank yous. I'd like to extend my thanks and gratitude to Jacalyn and William P. Egan for their support of the Preservation Society's fellowship program, and to the Society's CEO, Trudy Cox, Chief of Staff, Terry Dickinson, Director of Development, Sarah Iwanski, and my supervisor, Director of Museum Affairs and Chief Curator, who you just heard from, Leslie Jones, for guiding and helping develop this project. Thank you to Anthony Dickovitz, IT Specialist, for his invaluable knowledge about the internet, alongside Bridget Gallagher, Education and Program Assistant, and Lauren Landy, Digitization Specialist, for always being there to listen and bounce project ideas back and forth. Additionally, thank you to my co-fellows, Mary Kate Smolensky, Catherine Doucette, and Sébastien Dutton. Behind these slides and project is a whole host of collaborators and associates I'd like to further thank. I owe much to the conversations and project relationships I've developed with Keith Stokes and his 1696 Heritage Group, Anne Arnold and Steve Marino from the Museum of Newport Irish History, Kate Wells from the Providence Public Library and her Rhode Island LGBTQ+ Community Archives, Tony Bells, archivist from the Tamaqua Museum, Sean O'Connor and Danny Cano and their organization Newport Out, and Tracy Johnson, Executive Director of the Newport Art House. My work this year has been directly inspired by Dr. KJ Rawson at Northeastern University in his work in creating and directing the Digital Transgender Archive, alongside Dr. Tiffany Moma of Sewanee, the founder and co-director of the Black Craftspeople Digital Archive. Thank you both for the work you're doing and the advice you've given. Additionally, thank you to Vivian Jill and Valerie Chen of the Frick and Eric Johnson of the Folger Shakespeare Library. Finally, I'd like to thank Dr. Luann Tecunzo at the University of Delaware, my parents, family, and friends, both near and abroad, and specifically 3 friends, Deanna Webb, Erica Smythe, and Sam Matera. Before jumping into the thick of things, I'd like to make a disclaimer that while the work I've been doing this year and will continue to do next year is concerned with building and implementing a digital archive about the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, I am not an archivist. While I have worked closely with archivists, been employed by and worked within archives, and am in fact close friends with numerous archivists, I am, given my employment and educational background, an archaeologist. I have two pictures here of me doing fieldwork, which you can hopefully see. The one on the left is leading an underwater site survey of a shipwreck in the Caribbean. And the one on the right is actually from my first excavation ever, which was in Charleston, South Carolina. And funnily enough, led by Dr. John Marcoux, who at that time was working for Newport's Salve Regina. While the two fields of archaeology and archive library sciences are often thought of as completely different, and they do in fact entail different skill sets, I believe their notions about memory, the past, and time are relatively the same. Both fields understand that history, knowledge, and memory are fickle things, and that there is power in the preservation of buildings, objects, and stories. If you're listening tonight, you'll hear me say the words memory, power, and time a lot, as these are the themes I've been focusing on for this past year. Memory, as it pertains to what stories, things, and people from the past are remembered and which are forgotten. Power, as it relates to systemic and institutional control and authority in regards to one's access to the past, or in other words, a person's access to memory. And finally, time, perhaps the most intangible but visible of the three, concerning how time moves, both linearly on a progressive scale from past to present to future, and non-linearly, with the idea that all time lives as one. I'll return to this notion in just a second. But for the moment, would like you to take a look around you and center yourself in Rosecliffe's ballroom tonight. How do memory, power, and time intersect with one another here? For those of you joining by Zoom, I've attached an image of Rosecliffe's ballroom for you to picture and hopefully imagine the site. Please take a moment to study this and center yourself here. Historic preservation is a powerful tool. As you look around the room tonight, I'd like you to reflect on a few questions. What memories is the Preservation Society keeping alive and protecting through this and our other mansions' continual upkeep and maintenance, which have been silenced and laid dormant? What structures of power from the Gilded Age and Progressive era were integral to the creation of this site, and thus explicitly connected to how it is interpreted, interacted with, and accessed today? Finally, what is this room's relationship to time? How has it aged? What is its future? And what does it say about us, our culture, and our values that this house and surrounding Bellevue Avenue seemingly remain frozen in a specific time, even as the world around them changes? I'd like to direct your attention now to a quote from Walida Imarisha, an educator, writer, public scholar, and spoken word artist based in Washington State, who, in her 2015 keynote speech to the graduates of Portland State University entitled Sankofa, Survival, and Science Fiction, said, quote, "The past is never really past. What those who came before survived, what they protected, what they grew in hostile soil, that is as present as the air we are all breathing. All moments of time live as one. Right now, your past sits next to you. The present is holding your hand, while the future opens the door for you to walk through." End quote. This quote has stuck with me since I stumbled upon it in 2019, and it is the motivating idea behind the Gilded Age Digital Archive, or GADA for short. It's what I've been working on this past year. Imarisha's assertion that all moments of time live as one relates to GADA in the sense that what we remember and what we forget about the past is so powerful, it has already shaped our present and future. In other words, what is housed within the archive, the memory, knowledge, and ideas from years ago, actively shapes our world today. And again, echoing Sebastian's presentation, the past is never really past, and preservation is power. Moving on now to talk a little more in depth about my project. The Gilded Age Digital Archive, or GADA for short, as I've just mentioned, is a digital communal archive concerned with the preservation, education, and exhibition of Gilded Age and Progressive Era material culture, circa 1870 to 1930, for public use and access. Its mission is to create a more inclusive society where differences are recognized, respected, and cherished instead of feared, loathed, and silenced. And its vision is to provide the public with free, open access, digitized archival materials regarding, but not limited to, the social, political, economic, environmental, and technological movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The site will be composed of 4 features or sections: a digital archive, where scholars, students, and the general public can access and browse digitized archival collections from the Preservation Society and other partnering institutions. An exhibition space for the curation and production of digital thematic exhibitions, exploring a range of topics from the Gilded Age, from Gilded Age identity, as expressed through masquerade costumes, for instance, to labor rights and issues of the Progressive Era, focusing on craftsmanship and industrial machinery. Next, a community portal, a space similar to the Smithsonian Learning Lab, where visitors will be able to create a login account and save or curate their own collections from the digitized material culture hosted on GADA. We are also planning that eventually the portal will allow users to upload their own artifacts, memory, and knowledge relating to the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, similar to New York City's Tenement Museum and their initiative, Your Story, Our Story, and the Black Craftspeople Digital Archive's Research Contribution feature. Finally, GADA will include a yet-to-be-named blog spot, a space on the site where visitors can read journal articles written by guest scholars about archival objects, engage with educational curricula, and keep up to date on news within the digital humanities and heritage world. The intention behind all aspects of GADA is first and foremost to ensure that the public has free access to historic material. Secondary to this is the project's initiative to work across traditional institutional boundaries via a framework of communal multivocality, a community of many voices. GADA's inner structure as a communal multivocal archive relates to the management of its archival collections, which hopes to foster and build a network of knowledge between partnering institutions. What this means is that neither the Preservation Society nor any other institution will own the sole rights to the site's total collection. Instead, partnering institutions, be they small historic house museums or larger multi-site institutions, will upload their own artifacts to the archive site, maintaining original ownership of their digitized objects, and thus ensuring GADA begins its life and remains a community of many voices. Kind of summing all of that up, GADA collections owned separately, but managed collectively. Within this framework, traditional locales of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, like the Breakers, will be connected to sites such as Hearst Castle in San Simeon and Vizcaya Mansion in Miami. And while these specific sites can be tied together via the fortunes of the men who ordered their construction, there are also other thematic avenues that connect them: issues of labor, immigration, politics, gender, and race. GADA's communal multivocality hopes to not only connect these bastions of Gilded Age wealth to one another, but also form connections between mansions and sites such as the Newport Irish History Museum or New York City's the Tenement Museum. Furthermore, we hope that these networks of knowledge created by GADA's archival management will engage and inspire the public to dig deeper and explore less well-known or previously silenced parts of the past. This framework is implicit throughout all aspects of GADA, from the creation of digital exhibitions, what we envision to be a cross-institutional process where curators and museum professionals come together from an assortment of organizations and work side by side in order to create exciting and new ways for the public to think critically about and connect with the past, to the site's blog spot, which will allow for more transparent interaction between the public and heritage world, pulling back the curtain of mystique and revealing how history is created, memories are preserved, and the structures of power that either support or hinder these movements. I am perhaps, however, getting ahead of myself. A communally managed archive is important, not only to foster teamwork and cooperation between a diverse array, both geographically and thematically, of heritage organizations, but also because it seeks to combat the archive's colonial origins. This conversation is started by two questions. One, what is an archive? And two, how is the archive colonial? They are essential to understanding the past, present, and future of archivization within the Western world. To begin, an archive is, quote, a collection or number of collections that are considered to have historical and cultural significance, in which materials have been ordered or sorted and cataloged, and which might be accessible to few or many users, end quote. Archives are political acts. They are often purposefully made in order to preserve certain ideas, histories, and structures of power that their creators and contributors deem significant. They can be housed in public libraries, such as the Newport Public Library, pictured on the left, and its collection of microfilm and historic city directories, local societies, like the Preservation Society's own archival and museum collections, pictured in the middle, and state or national offices, such as the National Archives and Records Administration building in Washington, D.C., on the right, where the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Declaration of Independence are all housed. Archives also contain an assortment of things, such as, quote, texts, images, recordings, excavated items, and botanical material, end quote, alongside less obvious things like, quote, words, texts, ideas, symbols, shrines, images, performances, and objects, end quote. This digital collage, created by archaeologist and landscape architect Natalie McCarthy, is representative of what is stored within the archive. I don't know if you can see my mouse. We have words, images, recordings, excavated items, botanical material, if you're thinking about the river, performances, we have Sade, and objects. The archive pulls all of these things together to form a catalog of a cataloged swirling mass of things, of objects and ideas created by humans and imbued with cultural meaning, what we might call material culture. Material culture has been defined as man's transformed environment, portable artifacts, food, fields, houses, monuments, quarries, etc. It is essentially anything shaped by humans and imbued with cultural meaning. Thus, the archive houses material culture. Most importantly, perhaps, is what happens when people access and utilize the archive. Because, as archivist Marisa J. Fuentes has stated, quote, history is produced from what the archive offers, end quote. A majority of our ideas about the past, about history, memory, and tradition are informed by archives, gathered from what people have deemed worthy of saving and preserving from the past. These features of archival work, however, are not the only things produced archivally. Archives are integral to the fabric of our government processes, from economic policy to court legislation, and perhaps most pertinent today, health records. Archives are used by almost every and all of us, whether we realize it or not. The Supreme Court, pictured on the left, for instance, relies upon archives when hearing cases, referring to judicial precedents and publishing their decisions. Likewise, our banks, using the New York Stock Exchange on the right, kind of illustrate that, rely upon archives to track credit. Your monthly credit card statement is, in a way, representative of a larger economic archive. While archives are all around us today, it is important to note that our 21st century archives are descendants from colonization and are therefore tools of active colonization. Colonization is the commodification, extraction, and exploitation of indigenous land, resources, and people by a foreign entity. Colonization of the Americas began in 1492 with Columbus's voyage to the Caribbean and continues today in certain parts of the world. On the right is an image of Hunter House, which, as Catherine and Mary Kate illustrated last week in their presentation, was established through colonization. As European and American colonizers and settlers raced through the Americas over the course of roughly 500 years, they collected, preserved, and produced information regarding indigenous peoples, cultures, and environments. This information was often labeled and stored in rooms or cabinets of curiosities, as illustrated on the right, atlases, and more broadly, libraries of princely noblemen. Furthermore, successful colonial endeavors were, quote, built on the foundations of statistics and surveys, and relied upon the accumulation, safeguarding, and production of accurate knowledge regarding diverse societies, customs, and geographies. Colonists relied on these data collections, on these what we might call early archives, in order to survive in the Americas, enslave and exploit the land, resources, and people they found there. Aimé Césaire, a politician and poet from the French Caribbean island of Martinique, in his discourse on colonialism, said, quote, "No one colonizes innocently, that no one colonizes with impunity either, that a nation which colonizes, that a civilization which justifies colonization, and therefore force, is already a sick civilization, a civilization which is morally diseased," end quote. The Western Archive is colonial through its capture and labeling of knowledge, memory, and tradition, and is a direct link between early eras of European colonization and our present society. Returning now to the archive. Most Western archives and archivists follow a general workflow that details the appraising, acquiring, processing, and preserving of objects and artifacts, transforming old documents and other material culture into archival collections. The photograph on the right illustrates the processing and preserving of material culture. Artifacts are excavated, undergo conservation and study, and are then labeled and placed, in this case, into desalination baths in order to ensure future preservation. The hoe in the foreground right here is no longer an instrument of agriculture. It is, through the archaeological and archival process, an archival object. Its original purpose, alongside its name and usage, have changed. Archivization has traditionally removed and thus recontextualized historic objects away from their original or indigenous communities and placed emphasis on their preservation, consciously deciding which objects and the stories they tell are worth saving, and therefore, which histories are worth remembering. Our current structures of power, especially in terms of political representation and access to essential resources, are directly correlated to issues of cultural memory. If someone's history is not remembered, if it is purposely erased from the record or symbolically annihilated from media representations, it renders that person pastless, without a past. And someone without a past is often perceived of as dangerous, incomprehensible, and other. To deny someone their past, their histories and memories, is to deny them their present existence, and therefore future. Within this framework, an anti- or decolonial archive does not and cannot exist because archives are intrinsically built to extract, accrue, and categorize information. This is an issue that has plagued me the entire year, thinking about and building the framework for GADA. If an archive cannot truly be decolonized, what can it be instead? Is it possible to build an ethical archive within the existing colonial one? A repository of knowledge away from the privatization and exploitation of memory, and a space fueled by cross-institutional collaboration and outreach. I understand that I've asked many questions in this presentation tonight, and don't worry, there's still a few more to come. But returning to GADA once again, after our detour through the archive and colonization, deposits us at the doorstep of the Gilded Age, the time period GADA is concerned with and specifically interested in understanding beyond its stories of robber barons and muckrakers. The name itself, coined by Charles Dudley Warner and Samuel Clemens, otherwise known as Mark Twain, for their 1873 The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, pictured on the right, hints at a society concerned with excess, a society whose aspirations are rooted in the accumulation of land, gold, and wealth, yet lies on the foundations of common metal, wood, or stone, a society of pretense and deceit, as illustrated by the Gilded Age era cartoon on the left. And while these are perhaps the most common narratives associated with the Gilded Age and Progressive era, there are also histories of Native American political representation and fights for sovereignty, memories of queer life, expression, and performance, and traditions of Black power, representation, and unionization that we have yet to see added to the period's canon. This begs the question, however, is adding to the archival canon that has historically discriminated against narratives that are not those of elite, white, cisgender, heterosexual men enough to reverse years of erasure and symbolic annihilation? If the structures of power that were created, enabled, and promoted these modes of discrimination left intact, what more damage might they cause? Again, is it possible to create an ethical archive within the existing colonial one? At this moment in time, I do not have the answers, but GADA is an experiment that will hopefully allow us to explore these and other questions in more detail. As discussed prior, GADA is being built from ideas of communal multivocality, with a desire and need to work with other institutions, donors, and individuals in order to document a diverse history and open up the door for people to see a more nuanced and entangled glimpse of the past. One much discussed idea is to cap the number of submissions a single institution can make to the digital archive. This would ensure larger institutions, like the Preservation Society, would not be able to overflow the site with our collections, while guaranteeing smaller community-run historic house museums, for example, the opportunity to showcase their collections and increase their organization's visibility. In other words, leveling the playing field between institutions in terms of collection upload, access, and use, as kind of illustrated by this animation. So on the right, we have kind of the capped size of GADA's collection, what institutions can contribute. So from small collection, from a small institution, that fits in. From a larger institution and a larger collection, it's a similar size. Furthermore, GADA is concerned with deconstructing traditional silos of knowledge often held behind ivory towers. Community history is just as, if not more important than institutionalized history. Another reason for this content cap is to make institutions critically examine their collections by asking the questions, what memories do we want to make accessible to GADA users? What structures of power do we uphold with the narratives we already produce for public consumption, And what timelines from the past do our objects relate to? And what futures can we imagine through them? Institutional archives have traditionally been governed by a select number of voices, often reflecting a privileged and particular historical worldview. This means a single or minute selection of people have, for many years, had the power to name, label, and categorize material culture without input from the artifact's original makers, owners, communities, or context. This is a direct continuation of colonization. The argument can be made that I myself, in thinking about and constructing the framework for GADA in such a way, am still promoting and profiting from a privileged and colonial viewpoint. By limiting the number of objects uploaded to the archive, however, and most importantly, partnering with a whole host of different organizations, GADA and the Preservation Society hopes to move past the archive's history of inaccessibility towards a future of communal multivocality. What this means is that the archive's power in acquiring, naming, and preserving objects, transforming them from material culture into archival collections, is no longer reserved for a select few behind closed doors, but instead falls to a diverse group of caretakers intent on honoring and listening to the many histories objects have to tell us. A single artifact can have hundreds of memories, meanings, and histories attached to it. As noted Nobel Peace Prize winner and Northern Irish politician John Hume wrote in his A New Ireland, Politics, Peace, and Reconciliation, quote, "Difference of itself need not be a problem. The issue for those seeking stability and harmony is not the elimination of diversity, but its accommodation. There is no peace, no stability, no security in seeking to have political arrangements which reflect and respect only one tradition and its values," end quote. It is through difference that we find common ground, and it is through an entangled past that we find our present. I'd like to return once more to Walida Imarisha and her discussion of time. If all time lives as one, it is essential we understand that what we remember matters. The memories we carry and leave through time are the cornerstones to power, both personal and otherwise. The stories we tell, the histories we engage with through projects such as GADA, have shaped and will continue to shape the world around us. The thing that is required of us now is caution. For every time we engage with the past, what we are really doing is remembering the future. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Fran, and thank you, Sebastian. We have a few moments available for Q&A if anybody would like to ask questions. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot of information from both of them, which goes to show what a year of research can reveal. Well, people on Zoom.
Hi, in respect to the GADA, do you have in mind any organizations that you are really striving that you would like to, like for minorities, or do you have one that you're have a goal or that you would like to?
Yeah, not at the moment, I guess. We do have the Newport Irish History Museum and Keith Stokes with 1696 Heritage Group have signed on, essentially. I would love SADA, which is South Asian American Digital Archive. They are a community archive, so they are really rooted in community work. I would love to have them join on to the project. But also at the moment, kind of developing the project at this rate, what we're really doing is looking at regional organizations at the moment to expand. SADA is based in California, so that would come later. Yeah.
Just to build off of that also, this is all still in the planning phase. So what Fran and I have also been taking on is how do we develop this with intention to start locally and then expand ourselves out so we know that we're doing this correctly. So with our partners that we've been speaking with and building sort of the ideas about GADA with, there will be some very specific agreements made as part of the partnerships. Anybody else have questions? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, okay, the question is plans for the third floor.
Yeah. It's a really great question. So right now there are many different options, and so there's not any one set plan. We've looked at possibly doing a tour focused on Ogden Codman, turning it into some sort of a research center for visiting scholars. There's a lot to discuss. It's a very special space, and so they don't want to jump into something immediately with like the first thing that comes to mind. So it's all still very much up in the air and under discussion. Not to my knowledge at this point, no.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming, Sebastian and Fran. Congratulations on your year of your fellowship. Well, thank you for your support and attending. We hope to see you next week at our Winslow lecture.